The drive to Mountain Lake took 3 hours through winding Colorado mountain roads that I remembered from childhood trips. But everything looked different now. Sharper, more ominous, like I was seeing the landscape through a sniper scope instead of rose-colored glasses. Pierce had picked me up at dawn in a black Toyota 4Runner, the kind of practical vehicle that could handle mountain terrain without drawing attention. We'd barely spoken during the first hour, both lost in our own thoughts as we climbed through foothills that gradually gave way to pine forests and granite peaks. It wasn't until we passed the small town of Fairplay that Pierce finally broke the silence. "I should prepare you for what we might find up there," he said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I'd insisted on sitting in the back seat, old military habit that kept my hands free and gave me a better view of our surroundings. "Your grandfather was thorough in his documentation. Some of what he uncovered might be difficult to process." "Mr. Pierce," I said, adjusting the straps on my tactical backpack. "I've seen mass graves in Afghanistan and held dying soldiers in Iraq. I think I can handle whatever financial documents my family left behind." He nodded slowly. "It's not just financial documents, Lieutenant. Henry discovered some personal information about your family history that, well, let's just say it adds another layer to why your parents were so eager to push you out of the family business." Something cold settled in my stomach. What kind of personal information? The kind that explains why a decorated war hero like your grandfather would choose to leave his entire fortune to a granddaughter his own son had disowned. The rest of the drive passed in heavy silence as we climbed higher into the Rockies. Mountain Lake sat at 9,200 feet elevation, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through aspen groves and past granite outcroppings that looked like ancient monuments. I remembered being carsick on this road as a child, my father driving too fast while complaining about the inconvenience of visiting, quote, "the old man's wilderness obsession." Grandpa Henry's cabin came into view around a bend in the road like something from a different century. Built from hand-hewn logs in the 1940s, it sat on a small bluff overlooking the pristine alpine lake, surrounded by towering pines and completely isolated from the modern world. No cell phone service, no internet, no neighbors for miles. Just the kind of place where a man could think clearly about complicated problems. Or hide evidence of his family's crimes. Pierce parked beside the cabin's covered porch, and we sat for a moment taking in the view. The lake stretched out below us like a mirror, reflecting the snow-capped peaks that surrounded the valley. I could see the spot on the eastern shore where Grandpa Henry and I used to sit at sunrise, fishing for brook trout, while he told stories about his service in Vietnam. "He brought you here regularly?" Pierce asked, studying my expression. "Every summer until I turned 16. Sometimes just weekends during the school year when he could convince my parents to let me come." I shouldered my pack and stepped out of the vehicle. They always said it was too dangerous, too isolated, too much of an inconvenience. Now I'm wondering if they just didn't want me spending time alone with him. The cabin key was exactly where Grandpa Henry had always kept it, under the third stone in the walkway, wrapped in an old tobacco pouch that smelled like pipe smoke and mountain air. My hands were shaking slightly as I unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. Nothing had changed. The main room still featured the massive stone fireplace where we'd roasted marshmallows and played chess on winter evenings. The kitchen still had the cast-iron skillet hanging on its hook, seasoned black from decades of use. His reading chair sat by the window, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the side table next to a coffee mug that still bore the faint ring of his last visit. But Pierce was already moving toward the back of the cabin, where Grandpa Henry's military memorabilia covered one wall in a carefully arranged display. His Purple Heart sat in a place of honor at the center, flanked by his Bronze Star, his Vietnam Service Medal, and a dozen other ribbons and commendations that represented a lifetime of service and sacrifice. "The safe is behind the display case," Pierce said, running his hands along the edges of the frame. "Your grandfather installed it himself about 2 years ago. Said he needed somewhere secure to keep important documents." I found the hidden latch, a small button disguised as a screwhead, and the entire display swung outward on concealed hinges, revealing a military-grade safe built into the cabin's log wall. The digital lock glowed red, waiting for the 6-digit combination. My commissioning date, June 14, 2019, 061419. The lock chirped softly and turned green. The heavy door swung open with a soft whoosh of air, revealing an interior packed with manila folders, document boxes, and what looked like dozens of USB drives carefully labeled and organized. Jesus, I whispered, staring at the volume of material. How long was he collecting all this? Pierce pulled out the first box and set it on the dining table. Based on the timestamps on some of the documents, at least 3 years. Maybe longer. The first folder was labeled, quote, Whitmore Development Shell Companies, in Grandpa Henry's precise handwriting. Inside were corporate filings, bank statements, and tax documents for more than a dozen businesses I'd never heard of. Mountain Vista Construction, Colorado Commercial Properties, Rocky Mountain Development Services, Alpine Investment Group. All of them listing my parents as officers or directors. All of them showing massive cash flows with no corresponding business activity. These companies don't actually exist, I said, flipping through incorporation papers that looked legitimate but felt wrong somehow. Oh, they exist legally, Pierce replied, opening another folder. They have tax ID numbers, bank accounts, corporate addresses. But they don't have employees, equipment, or any actual business operations. They exist solely to move money around and create false paper trails. The next folder made my blood run cold. Charity fraud, victim documentation. Inside were dozens of letters from families who had donated to Whitmore family foundations, believing their money would fund college scholarships, after-school programs, and community centers. Heartbreaking letters from parents who had scraped together thousands of dollars because they believed in the Whitmore family's commitment to helping disadvantaged kids. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez from Aurora, who had donated $15,000 from her late husband's life insurance policy because she wanted to help other military families send their children to college. The Jenkins family from Grand Junction, who had given $8,000 they'd saved for their own daughter's wedding because Madison had personally assured them it would fund a new computer lab at the local Boys and Girls Club. Tom and Sarah Mitchell from Colorado Springs, who had donated their entire tax refund, $12,000, after attending a charity gala where my mother had given a tearful speech about the importance of education funding for at-risk youth. Every letter included copies of donation receipts, tax deduction forms, and follow-up correspondence asking about the progress of the programs their money was supposed to fund. Programs that had never existed. How many families? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Pierce consulted a spreadsheet in the back of the folder. 87 documented cases totaling $1.2 million in fraudulent charitable donations. And those are just the ones your grandfather was able to track down and contact personally. I set the folder down and walked to the window, staring out at the peaceful lake while my mind processed the scope of my family's betrayal. These weren't faceless corporations or wealthy investors who could absorb losses. These were working families, military veterans, retirees living on fixed incomes, people who had trusted the Whitmore name and been robbed of their hopes as well as their money. There's more, Pierce said quietly behind me. I turned around to find him holding a folder labeled Alexandra Personal History in red ink. What's that? Your grandfather's investigation into why your parents were so determined to push you out of the family business. What he found. Pierce hesitated. Lieutenant, you should sit down. I'm fine standing. Show me. He opened the folder and pulled out a birth certificate. Not the one I'd seen before, but an original from St. Joseph Hospital in Denver. My birth certificate, dated May 15, 1998, showing my mother as Victoria Whitmore and my father as... Richard Whitmore is not your biological father. The words hit me like sniper fire from an unexpected direction. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. What? Pierce pulled out another document, a DNA test report dated 6 months ago. Your grandfather became suspicious when he noticed you didn't share certain family traits. Eye color, blood type, some medical history that didn't match up. He had your DNA tested against samples from Richard and Victoria. I stared at the report, my eyes struggling to focus on the technical language. Probability of paternity, 0%. excluded as biological father with 99.97% certainty. Victoria is your biological mother, Pierce continued gently. But Richard found out about the affair when you were 3 years old. That's when the family dynamics changed. That's when you started being treated like an outsider. My legs gave out, and I sank into the nearest chair. Who is my father? Pierce pulled out a photograph, a military portrait of a man in army dress uniform. Strong jaw, dark eyes, the same stubborn expression I saw in the mirror every morning. Major Michael Chen, 10th Mountain Division. He was killed in action in Iraq in 2003 when you were 5 years old. I took the photograph with trembling hands. Grandpa Henry knew him? They served together in Vietnam. Chen was his communications specialist, then later his business partner in some early real estate investments. When Chen was deployed to Iraq, Henry promised to look after his family if anything happened to him. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. So when my mother had an affair with his old army buddy, Grandpa Henry felt responsible. More than that, Chen had asked Henry to be your godfather before he deployed. He left specific instructions that if something happened to him, he wanted Henry to make sure you had opportunities, education, a chance at a meaningful life. I thought about all those summers at the cabin, all the stories about military service and honor, and doing the right thing even when it was difficult. All the times Grandpa Henry had encouraged my interest in West Point, had supported my decision to serve, had been proud of my military career, when my own parents treated it like an embarrassment. He wasn't just being a good grandfather, I said slowly. He was honoring a promise to my real father. A promise your parents did everything they could to undermine. Richard never forgave Victoria for the affair, but he also couldn't afford the scandal of a divorce during the early years of building Whitmore development. So he took his anger out on you. Pierce handed me another document, a financial record showing payments from Richard to a private investigator. Your father hired someone to investigate your biological father's military record, looking for anything that might discredit him posthumously. When that failed, he started working to minimize your role in the family business, to reduce your inheritance, to basically erase you from the Whitmore legacy. I stared at the payment records, feeling something hot and poisonous rising in my chest. How long has he been planning this? Quote, the first payment to the private investigator was made when you were 12 years old, right around the time you started talking about wanting to go to West Point instead of studying business. 12 years old. I remembered that year, the way family dinners had gotten quieter, the way Richard had stopped including me in conversations about the family business, the way I'd started feeling like I was constantly disappointing them without understanding why. Victoria went along with this? Pierce pulled out email printouts. Your mother was more concerned with protecting her social standing and her access to family money. She was willing to sacrifice your relationship with the family to maintain her position as Richard's wife. I read through emails between my parents discussing, quote, the Alexandra problem and how to minimize her expectations regarding inheritance and transition her out of family business discussions. Cold, calculating language about their own daughter like I was a corporate liability to be managed. There's something else, Pierce said, his voice even more gentle than before. Your grandfather left additional documentation about your biological father, military records, personal letters, photographs from their service together. Michael Chen was a decorated soldier, lieutenant, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, commendation for valor under fire. You come from good stock on both sides. He handed me a thin folder labeled Michael Chen for Alexandra. Inside were dozens of photographs. Chen in training at Fort Benning, Chen with his unit in Iraq, Chen and Grandpa Henry fishing together at Mountain Lake in the 1980s. There were letters Chen had written to Henry from Iraq, talking about his hopes for his daughter's future, his pride in her intelligence and curiosity, his dreams of teaching her to fish and hunt, and appreciate the outdoors the way Henry had taught him. Letters from a father I'd never known, expressing love for a daughter he'd barely had time to meet. At the bottom of the folder was a videotape labeled For Alex from Dad. Pierce had come prepared. He pulled a small portable TV and VCR from his equipment bag, the kind of setup private investigators used for surveillance work. Your grandfather had this converted from an old camcorder tape. Chen made it right before his final deployment. The screen flickered to life, showing a young man in desert camouflage sitting in what looked like a military barracks. He had my eyes, my stubborn chin, my habit of running his hand through his hair when he was nervous. "Hey, baby girl," he said to the camera, his voice soft with a slight southern accent. "If you're watching this, it means Daddy didn't make it home from this deployment. I'm sorry about that. I wanted to be there to teach you all the things a father should teach his daughter." I was crying before he finished the first sentence. "But I need you to know that you are the best thing I ever did with my life. You're smart and brave and beautiful, and you're going to grow up to do amazing things. Henry's going to look after you. He promised me that. And I need you to listen to him. He's a good man, and he'll teach you about honor and service and doing what's right, even when it's hard." Chen leaned closer to the camera. "I love you, Alexandra. I'm proud of you already, and I know I'm going to be even prouder of the woman you become. Be strong, be brave, and remember that your daddy loves you more than all the stars in the Colorado sky." The tape ended with him blowing a kiss to the camera. I sat in that mountain cabin, surrounded by evidence of my family's crimes and betrayal, watching a message from a father I'd never known, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The anger I'd been carrying for years, anger at being excluded, anger at being treated like a disappointment, anger at never being good enough for the Whitmore name, transformed into something cleaner and more focused. Purpose. Pierce handed me a tissue and waited while I composed myself. "Lieutenant," he said finally, "now you understand why your grandfather left you everything. It wasn't just about the money or the business shares. It was about giving you the tools to honor both your father's, your biological father's memory, and Henry's promise to protect you." I wiped my eyes and straightened my shoulders. "What else is in the safe?" Pierce smiled grimly. "Evidence that's going to bring down everyone who participated in this conspiracy. Bank records, email trails, recorded phone conversations, photographs of forged documents. Your grandfather spent 3 years building a case that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy." He pulled out another box labeled "Federal Evidence Copies for FBI." He made multiple copies of everything, stored in different locations: safety deposit boxes in Denver and Colorado Springs, another cache at a friend's ranch in Wyoming, digital copies uploaded to secure cloud servers. He was planning to go to the authorities? He was planning to give you the choice, same as he did with the inheritance. He believed you had the right to decide how to handle both the evidence and the money. I stood up and walked back to the window, looking out at the lake where my real father had taught my grandfather to fish, where Grandpa Henry had later taught me the same skills, passing down lessons about patience and precision, and reading the water for signs of life beneath the surface. "They made one critical mistake," I said, turning back to Pierce. "What's that?" "They assumed I was weak. They assumed that being pushed out of the family would break me, make me give up and go away quietly." I picked up the DNA report and stared at the name Michael Chen. They didn't realize they were dealing with the daughter of 2 soldiers. Pierce began repacking the documents. "So what's our next move, Lieutenant?" I thought about my family, probably still celebrating their successful manipulation of Grandpa Henry's funeral, still confident they'd permanently erased me from the Whitmore legacy, still stealing money from families who trusted them, still building their empire on fraud and lies. They had no idea that their carefully constructed world was about to collapse around them. "We're going to war, Mr. Pierce. But first, we're going to do reconnaissance." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my sister Madison's Instagram account. She'd posted a photo just an hour ago. Herself and Trevor at some trendy Denver restaurant, champagne glasses raised in a toast, the caption reading, "Celebrating family legacy and new beginnings. #blessed life. #Whitmore strong." "First rule of military strategy," I said, showing Pierce the phone. "Know your enemy's position and capabilities before you attack. And what do you think we'll find?" I thought about the years of exclusion, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, the way my parents had systematically undermined my relationship with the only family member who'd ever truly cared about me. We're going to find that they've gotten careless. Criminals always do when they think they've won. They're going to have left trails, made mistakes, trusted the wrong people. Pierce nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather would be proud." Quote, Both my grandfathers, I corrected, looking at the photograph of Michael Chen one more time before tucking it carefully into my jacket pocket. And they're both going to get the justice they deserve. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the peaks again, but this time I wasn't worried about the weather. I was thinking about tactics, about evidence, about the most effective way to dismantle a criminal conspiracy built on family trust and social connections. I was thinking like a soldier preparing for the most important mission of her career. The mission to honor my fathers and destroy the people who had betrayed us all. Times asterisk. End of part 2, asterisk. Coming up in part 3. Alex returns to Denver with a plan to infiltrate her family's business operations, but what she discovers at Whitmore Development Group headquarters will reveal an even deeper conspiracy and put her directly in the crosshairs of people who've already killed to protect their secrets. What I discovered instead was a $4 million inheritance and a conspiracy that had been destroying lives for decades, including mine. The rain hammered against the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Cathedral in Denver, Colorado, each droplet creating tiny fractals of light across the polished marble floor. But inside, the atmosphere was even more frigid than the October storm brewing outside. I stood in the doorway of the side chapel, water still dripping from my Army service uniform, the silver bars on my shoulders catching the amber glow of the candles that flickered around my grandfather's mahogany casket. 25 years old, First Lieutenant Alexandra Maria Torres, though no one in this room had called me by my chosen surname since I was 18. To them, I was still Alexandria Whitmore, the family disappointment who chose fatigues over Prada, military discipline over board meetings, and service to country over service to the family empire. I hadn't set foot in this cathedral, or this city, for 7 years. Not since the day my parents delivered their ultimatum in the marble-columned study of the Whitmore estate, telling me I was no longer compatible with the family vision, and that my misguided military fantasies were becoming an embarrassment to the Whitmore name. The faces that turned toward me as I entered weren't surprised. They were irritated, like guests at an exclusive dinner party who'd just been crashed by an uninvited stranger. My mother, Victoria Whitmore, sat in the front pew wearing a black Chanel dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair not daring to have a strand out of place even in grief. Her expression could have frozen the Colorado River in July. My father, Richard Whitmore, barely glanced up from his iPhone, where he was probably checking stock prices or reviewing contracts even during his own father's funeral. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his Armani suit tailored to hide the softness that came from decades of 3-martini lunches and country club living. My sister Madison, 27 and looking like she'd stepped off the cover of Colorado Business magazine, sat beside them with her husband Trevor, a cardboard cutout of a man who'd married into the Whitmore name and fortune. Madison's eyes found mine across the chapel, and she rolled them so dramatically I'm surprised they didn't fall out of her surgically perfected face. "Look what the storm dragged in," Madison muttered to Trevor, her voice carrying just far enough for the first 3 rows to hear. Several elderly relatives turned to stare, their faces a mixture of disapproval and morbid curiosity. I ignored her. I ignored all of them. I hadn't come for their approval or their forgiveness. I had come for Grandpa Henry, Colonel Henry James Whitmore, Purple Heart recipient, Bronze Star winner, and the only person in the Whitmore family who ever looked at my military career and said, "I'm proud of you, soldier," instead of, "When are you coming home to join the real family business?" The real family business. The Whitmore Development Group. 3 generations of luxury real estate, shopping centers, political connections, and carefully cultivated influence across Colorado and the Mountain West. The family empire that had built Denver skylines, shaped boulders downtown, and put Whitmore names on hospital wings, university buildings, and charity foundations throughout the state. The empire I'd walked away from when I chose West Point over Wharton Business School, when I chose serving my country over serving family profits, when I chose to earn my own way instead of riding on a name I'd never felt worthy of carrying. "Such a shame about that girl," I heard Mrs. Pemberton, one of the family's longtime social circle, whisper to her companion. "Henry always had such a soft spot for her. Probably why she turned out so difficult." "Military phase," whispered back Mrs. Chen, another family friend. "She'll grow out of it eventually. Come crawling back when she realizes what she's missing." "If there's anything left to crawl back to," Mrs. Pemberton replied with the kind of knowing tone that suggested she'd heard something the rest of us hadn't. If only they knew what I was about to discover. The service itself was everything you'd expect from a Whitmore family event. Expensive, perfectly choreographed, and absolutely devoid of genuine emotion. The flower arrangements alone probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. White roses and lilies filled the chapel with a cloying sweetness that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of old money and older secrets. Father Morrison, who'd been the family's priest for decades, delivered a homily about Henry's quote, dedication to family, faith, and the Colorado community. He spoke about charitable giving and business leadership, about being a pillar of society and a devoted family man. But he didn't mention the Henry Whitmore I remembered, the one who'd sneak me extra cookies when my mother wasn't looking, who taught me to tie fishing knots on the back porch while telling stories about his days in Vietnam, who was the only adult who never made me feel like I had to apologize for wanting something different than what the family had planned for me. Madison gave the family eulogy, her voice perfectly modulated for maximum emotional impact. She spoke about Grandpa Henry's unwavering dedication to family legacy and his vision for continuing the Whitmore tradition of excellence in business and community service. Every word was calculated, rehearsed, designed to reinforce the family brand even in death. My father spoke next, delivering remarks about continuing Henry's vision for Colorado's development and, quote, honoring his memory through continued growth and success. He mentioned several ongoing projects: the new shopping complex in Boulder, the luxury housing development in Aspen, the downtown Denver high-rise that would bear the Whitmore name. All ventures that would ensure the family's influence continued to grow, their wealth continued to multiply, their power continued to expand. My mother didn't speak at all during the service. She simply sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief at precisely timed intervals, playing the part of the grieving daughter-in-law with the same calculated precision she brought to everything else in her life. I knew that handkerchief. It was one of a set Grandpa Henry had given her for Christmas 3 years ago, Irish linen with hand-embroidered VW initials. Even her grief was branded. I sat alone in the back pew, surrounded by empty space that felt like a moat separating me from the rest of the family. Around me, Denver's elite filled the cathedral: politicians, business leaders, society matrons, and climbing socialites who treated the funeral like a networking opportunity. I recognized faces from the newspaper society pages, from charity galas I'd been dragged to as a teenager, from the rarefied world of Colorado high society that had always felt like a gilded cage to me. While Madison spoke about legacy and tradition, I found myself remembering a different Henry Whitmore entirely. The man who taught me to fish at Mountain Lake when I was 8 years old, standing knee-deep in the crystal-clear water at dawn, showing me how to read the surface for signs of trout below. "Patience, little warrior," he'd say when I got frustrated with my tangled line. "The best things in life require patience and precision." The man who drove 4 hours from Denver to Colorado Springs to watch my commissioning ceremony at the Air Force Academy when my parents were too busy with a board meeting to attend. He'd sat in the front row wearing his old Army dress uniform, medals polished to a mirror shine, tears streaming down his weathered face as I took my oath as an officer. The man who sent care packages to Afghanistan during my deployment, filled with beef jerky, crossword puzzles, and handwritten letters that always started with, "My brave granddaughter," and ended with reminders that he was proud of the woman I was becoming, proud of my service, proud that I'd chosen to build something meaningful with my life. That Henry Whitmore wasn't being eulogized today. That man was too real, too human, too complicated for the sanitized version of family history my relatives preferred to tell. As the service concluded and people began filing out toward the reception, I remained seated, watching the crowd flow past me like water around a stone. Designer dresses rustled against tailored suits, expensive jewelry caught the cathedral light, and conversations buzzed with the kind of subdued energy that came from mixing grief with social obligation. That's when I noticed him, a man in a charcoal gray suit standing near the side altar, clearly waiting for the crowds to thin. Late 50s, silver hair combed back in a classic style, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived several decades of important meetings. There was something about his posture, the way he held himself, that suggested military experience. A precision to his movements that spoke of discipline and attention to detail. As the last of the mourners filtered out toward their BMWs and Mercedes, he approached my pew with measured steps. "Lieutenant Torres?" His voice was calm, professional, with the kind of quiet authority that came from years of handling sensitive matters. "I'm Jonathan Pierce, Mr. Whitmore's attorney. Could we speak privately?" I glanced around the nearly empty cathedral. Through the stained glass windows, I could see my family's convoy of luxury cars gathering in the parking lot, probably planning the route to whatever exclusive restaurant they'd chosen for the reception I hadn't been invited to attend. "Sure," I said, standing and smoothing my dress uniform. "What can I do for you, Mr. Pierce?" He gestured toward a small room behind the main altar. "Perhaps somewhere more private? What I have to discuss with you is sensitive." I followed him through a narrow doorway into what appeared to be a vestry, the kind of utilitarian space where priests stored ceremonial robes and communion supplies. Folding chairs were stacked against one wall, and the air smelled of old wood and candle wax. Pierce set his briefcase on a small table and pulled out a thick manila folder, sealed with what looked like official legal tape. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions regarding this conversation," Pierce said, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses as he broke the seal on the folder. "He was quite certain you would come today, despite what your family might have told you about your standing with them." My stomach twisted into a familiar knot. "Look, Mr. Pierce, if Grandpa Henry left me something small, a watch, maybe some old photos, that's really nice. But I don't need anything from the family. I've made my own way just fine." Pierce paused in his document sorting and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Lieutenant, your grandfather's final bequest to you was not small." "Okay, so maybe a few $1,000s? I appreciate the gesture, but $4 million. The words hit me like incoming artillery. I actually took a step backward, my hand instinctively reaching for the wall to steady myself. For a moment, the room tilted, and I had to focus on breathing, a technique I'd learned during combat stress training to keep from passing out. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Pierce opened the folder completely, revealing a last will and testament bearing official seals, notary stamps, and enough legal language to choke a federal judge. $4 million in liquid assets, plus the cabin property at Mountain Lake, plus his 23% stake in Whitmore Development Group. I stared at the papers spread across the table, my brain struggling to process numbers that seemed to belong in someone else's reality. That can't be right. My parents told me he was practically broke. Medical bills from his cancer treatment, bad investments, the economy hitting his retirement savings. Pierce's expression didn't change, but I caught something that might have been amusement flickering in his eyes. "Your grandfather's total estate was worth approximately $12 million at the time of his death. His medical expenses were fully covered by his military veteran benefits and a comprehensive insurance policy he'd maintained for decades. His investment portfolio, while conservative, was extremely well managed." The room felt like it was shrinking around me. The will was updated when? 6 months ago, February 15th, to be precise. Pierce reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored paper with my name written across the front in Grandpa Henry's familiar handwriting. The same careful script that had addressed countless birthday cards and deployment letters over the years. "He asked me to give you this after informing you of the inheritance." My hands were shaking as I took the envelope. The paper felt expensive, weighty, the kind of stationery that suggested important words were contained within. I broke the wax seal, an old-fashioned touch that was so perfectly Grandpa Henry, and unfolded the letter inside. "Alex, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Jonathan has done his job. It also means you came to say goodbye, despite everything they've put you through. I knew you would. You never were one to abandon your post. They think they buried the truth with me. They're wrong. What I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear, but you're strong enough to handle it. You always were the strongest of all of us. The money I've left you isn't a gift, it's a weapon. The family business isn't what you think it is, and hasn't been for years. Start with the cabin. Look for what I hid where we used to watch the sunrise together. The real story is in the safe behind my Purple Heart display. Trust no one from the family. Trust Jonathan. He's been helping me document everything. And remember what I taught you about fishing. Sometimes you have to be patient to catch the big ones. They took you from me once. Don't let them do it again. With all my love and faith in who you've become, Grandpa Henry. P.S. The combination to the safe is your commissioning date. You'll know why when you see what's inside. I read the letter twice, then looked up at Pierce, who was watching me with the careful attention of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news. Mr. Pierce, I said slowly, what does he mean by the real story? Pierce leaned back against the table, his professional demeanor softening slightly. Your grandfather first contacted me 18 months ago with concerns about financial irregularities within Whitmore Development. What started as a simple audit request became something much more complex. How complex? Lieutenant, what we uncovered suggests systematic embezzlement, tax fraud, money laundering, and manipulation of family trust funds going back over a decade. Your grandfather spent the last year of his life quietly documenting evidence of financial crimes that could result in federal charges. The vestry suddenly felt claustrophobic. How much money are we talking about? Conservatively, $8 to $10 million diverted from family accounts, charitable foundations, and business investment funds. Possibly more. We're still unraveling some of the more sophisticated transactions. I slumped into one of the folding chairs, my dress uniform suddenly feeling too heavy, too formal, for a conversation that was rewriting everything I thought I knew about my family. And my parents? Pierce consulted a thick file folder. Your parents and sister appear to be the primary architects of the scheme. They've been using Whitmore Development as a front for money laundering through shell companies, false construction projects, and fraudulent charitable organizations. Everything suddenly clicked into place with sickening clarity. The family meetings I'd been excluded from starting around my sophomore year at West Point. The mysterious business trips that seemed to involve more private jet travel than actual construction projects. The way my parents always seemed to have unlimited money for luxury purchases, new cars, jewelry, vacation homes, while claiming the family business was going through a challenging period. The elaborate charity galas they hosted, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for causes that never seemed to show tangible results. The way they'd reacted when I'd asked innocent questions about the family finances during college, shutting down conversations with warnings about operational security and competitive intelligence. The charity foundations, I said slowly, the Whitmore Family Foundation, the Colorado Youth Development Trust. Shells, Pierce confirmed grimly. Money goes in from donors expecting tax deductions and community impact. Most of it gets funneled back out through fake vendor payments, inflated construction costs, and consultant fees paid to companies that exist only on paper. Quote, I thought about all the times I'd been trotted out at fundraising events as a teenager, the photogenic daughter in evening gowns posing with oversized checks, shaking hands with donors who believed their money was going to help underprivileged kids get college scholarships or fund after-school programs. How many people have been hurt by this? Pierce's expression grew even more serious. Difficult to quantify exactly, but we've identified at least 37 families who donated significant amounts believing they were funding legitimate charitable work. Plus the downstream effects, programs that never got funded, scholarships that were never awarded, community centers that were never built. And Grandpa Henry knew all this? He suspected irregularities for years, but it wasn't until your father asked him to co-sign some major loan documents 18 months ago that he decided to investigate formally. What he found horrified him. Pierce pulled out another folder, this one filled with photocopied bank statements, canceled checks, and what looked like correspondence between various financial institutions. Your grandfather was meticulous in his documentation, bank records, email printouts, recorded phone conversations, photographs of documents. He built a case that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. I stared at the evidence spread across the table, feeling like I was looking at x-rays of a terminal illness. Why didn't he go to the authorities himself? Pierce hesitated, choosing his words carefully. He was torn between his sense of justice and his desire to protect the family name. Also, frankly, he was hoping your parents might come to their senses if confronted with evidence of what they were doing. Did he confront them? 3 months ago, your father's response was to suggest that Henry was experiencing age-related confusion and perhaps should consider stepping back from family business matters. Your mother recommended he see a neurologist for quote, cognitive assessment. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. They'd been willing to gaslight their own family patriarch, to make him question his own sanity, rather than admit to their crimes. That's when he updated his will? That's when he realized you were the only family member he could trust to do the right thing. He'd been proud of your military service all along, but I think it was in those final months that he truly understood why you'd chosen the path you did. Quote, I stood up and walked to the small window, looking out at the Denver skyline where glass towers reflected the gray October sky. Somewhere out there, my family was probably sitting in an exclusive restaurant, toasting Grandpa Henry's memory with expensive wine while planning how to divide up his assets. Assets they thought they understood. Assets they had no idea had just slipped through their fingers. Lieutenant, Pierce said quietly behind me, what your grandfather left you isn't just money, it's a choice. You can take your inheritance and walk away from all of this. Live your life, serve your country, never look back. I turned around. Or you can use what he's given you, the money, the evidence, the business stake, to fight back. To expose what they've done and make sure they face consequences for their actions. Through the window, I could see storm clouds gathering over the Rocky Mountains, dark and heavy with the promise of serious weather. In Afghanistan, I'd learned to read weather patterns, to understand when a gentle breeze might become a devastating windstorm with little warning. Looking at the evidence spread across that table, I could feel the same kind of pressure change in the air. The business stake, I said. 23%. What does that mean practically? Pierce smiled for the first time since we'd started talking. It means you're now the second largest shareholder in Whitmore Development Group. Your parents control 35% jointly. Your sister has 15%. The remaining 27% is held by various board members and outside investors. So I can't control the company, but I can make their lives very difficult. That's one way to look at it. Another way is that you now have legal standing to demand financial audits, board meetings, and access to company records. You have the right to ask uncomfortable questions in very public forums. I thought about my family, probably raising their champagne glasses at that very moment, confident they'd successfully pushed me out of their lives and their business. Confident they could continue their elaborate financial shell game without interference. They had no idea what was coming. Mr. Pierce, I said, straightening my shoulders in a gesture that had become automatic after years of military training, when can we go to the cabin? His smile widened. I was hoping you'd ask that question. How about first thing tomorrow morning? Quote, outside, thunder rumbled across the Front Range, and the first fat raindrops began spattering against the window. For the first time since I'd walked into that cathedral, I felt something that wasn't grief or anger or disappointment. I felt like a soldier who'd just received her mission orders. The Whitmore Development Group headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Denver's financial district, its lobby adorned with marble imported from Italy, and a bronze plaque proclaiming, quote, building Colorado's future since 1952. I stood across the street at 7:30 a.m. on a gray Monday morning, studying the building through tactical binoculars while commuters streamed past me like water around a stone. Pierce sat in his rental car half a block away, monitoring police frequencies and keeping our escape route clear. We'd spent the weekend planning this operation with the precision of a military strike, studying building layouts, security protocols, and employee schedules. I was dressed in a tailored business suit that concealed a digital recorder, 2 backup phones, and enough evidence to destroy my family's empire. Today was the day everything changed. Alpha team in position, I whispered into my earpiece, using the tactical communications system Pierce had acquired through his private investigator contacts. Copy that, Lieutenant, Pierce's voice crackled back. Remember, you've got legal right to be there as a 23% shareholder. If they try to have you removed, demand a board meeting immediately. I crossed the street with the confident stride of someone who belonged in Denver's financial district, my military bearing disguised beneath corporate camouflage. The security guard in the lobby barely looked up as I badged in using the shareholder access credentials Pierce had activated over the weekend. But the receptionist on the 15th floor definitely recognized me. Lieutenant Torres? Sandra Martinez had been the Whitmore Development receptionist for 15 years. A sweet woman in her 50s, who'd always slipped me candy when I visited as a child. I didn't expect to see you here. Good morning, Sandra. I'm here for the executive meeting. I smiled pleasantly while pulling out my shareholder documentation. Mr. Pierce filed the proper notice last Friday. 23% shareholder requesting immediate access to financial records and board minutes. Sandra's face went pale. Oh my, let me call Mr. Richard right away. That won't be necessary. I'll announce myself. I walked past her desk before she could protest, heading toward the executive conference room where I could hear voices through the partially open door. My parents' voices, along with Madison and Trevor, discussing something that made them sound agitated and concerned. Can't let her get anywhere near the Aspen Project files, my father was saying. She doesn't have standing to demand anything, Madison replied. We made sure of that years ago. The lawyer says otherwise, my mother's voice, sharp with anxiety. Henry's will is ironclad. She's got 23% and shareholder rights. Then we make her an offer, Trevor suggested. Buy out her share before she can cause problems. I pushed the door open and stepped into the conference room like I was entering a briefing with enemy commanders. Good morning, family. The silence that followed was profound. My father dropped his coffee cup, sending hot liquids spreading across the polished mahogany table. Madison's mouth fell open in an expression that would have been comical under different circumstances. My mother's perfectly composed mask slipped for a moment, revealing something that looked almost like fear. Alexandra. My father recovered first, his voice carefully controlled. This is a private business meeting. Not anymore. I pulled out my documentation and set it on the table with a soft thud. 23% shareholder, requesting immediate access to all financial records, project files, and board meeting minutes for the past 5 years. You can't just, Madison started. Actually, I can. I remained standing while they sat, using height advantage to establish dominance. Another military tactic. Colorado corporate law is very clear about shareholder rights. I'm also requesting an emergency board meeting to discuss irregularities in company financial practices. The word irregularities hit them like a flashbang grenade. Trevor started fidgeting with his tie. Madison's face went 3 shades paler. My parents exchanged the kind of look that passed between co-conspirators when they realized their secret was out. What irregularities? My father asked, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. Instead of answering directly, I pulled out my phone and played a recording, Pierce's voice reading bank account numbers and transaction amounts from the shell company documents. Mountain Vista Construction, $2.3 million transferred to Cayman Islands, account 4479823. Colorado Commercial Properties, $1.8 million routed through Swiss bank account 9914477. Alpine Investment Group, $3. $2 million laundered through Gibraltar Shell Corporation. Turn that off, my mother hissed. Rocky Mountain Development Services, $1.9 million funneled through false construction contracts. Whitmore Family Foundation, $1.2 million in fraudulent charitable donations diverted to personal accounts. I said, turn it off. My father's composure cracked completely. I stopped the recording and looked around the table at their faces. Should I continue? Because I have about 40 more shell companies to get through. The silence stretched taut as a tripwire. What do you want? Madison finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Justice. I pulled out the first evidence folder and opened it on the table. For Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, who donated her husband's life insurance money believing it would help military families send their kids to college. For the Jenkins family, who gave up their daughter's wedding fund because you promised it would build a computer lab for disadvantaged kids. I scattered photographs across the table. Copies of the charity fraud victims' letters, their smiling family photos, their donation receipts. For Tom and Sarah Mitchell, who gave their entire tax refund because Mom gave such a touching speech about educational opportunities for at-risk youth. My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. These people trusted the Whitmore name, I continued, my voice growing harder. They believed in your fake foundations, your phony charities, your elaborate lies. And you stole from them. You stole their hope, along with their money. Alexandra, you don't understand the complexities of business, my father began. I understand fraud. I pulled out another folder. I understand money laundering. I understand tax evasion. And I understand that you've been systematically stealing from people who trusted you for over a decade. Trevor stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. I wasn't involved in... Sit down, Trevor. My voice carried the kind of command authority I'd developed leading soldiers in combat zones. You signed incorporation papers for 6 shell companies. You're involved up to your perfectly capped teeth. He sat down. But that's not the worst part, I continued, pulling out the DNA test results. The worst part is what you did to me. What you did to an innocent child because you couldn't handle the truth about your own marriage. I placed the paternity test on the table in front of my father. Richard Whitmore is not my biological father. Probability of paternity, 0%. My mother made a sound like she'd been shot. My real father was Major Michael Chen, 10th Mountain Division, killed in action in Iraq when I was 5 years old. A decorated soldier who died serving his country while you were busy building your criminal empire. I pulled out the photograph of Michael Chen in uniform and set it beside the DNA results. Grandpa Henry promised to look after me if anything happened to my father. And when you found out about the affair, instead of dealing with your marriage problems like adults, you decided to punish a child. You spent 20 years systematically excluding me, undermining me, making me feel like I wasn't good enough for the Whitmore name. My father's face had gone gray. Alexandra, You hired private investigators to dig up dirt on a dead war hero. You manipulated family gatherings to make me feel unwelcome. You told people I was unstable, unreliable, not family material. You tried to erase me from the Whitmore legacy because you couldn't erase me from your wife's infidelity. The words were coming faster now, 20 years of suppressed anger and hurt pouring out like water through a broken dam. But here's what you never understood. I didn't need the Whitmore name. I built my own identity, my own career, my own sense of worth. I became an officer in the United States Army. I led soldiers in combat. I served my country with honor, something none of you would understand. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline where glass towers reflected the morning sun. Michael Chen died fighting for freedom and democracy. Henry Whitmore served his country in Vietnam and built legitimate businesses that actually helped communities. And you dishonored both of them by turning the family name into a criminal conspiracy. When I turned back around, my mother was crying. Real tears, not the calculated display from the funeral. Alex, please, she whispered. I know we made mistakes, but we're still family. No. My voice was quiet but absolute. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie to each other for decades. Family doesn't try to erase each other from existence. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact labeled FBI Agent Sarah Martinez. Which brings us to the choice you have to make right now. What choice? Madison asked, her voice hollow. Option 1. I make this phone call and federal agents arrive within the hour to arrest all of you for fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. You spend the next 10 to 15 years in federal prison, while your victims get whatever restitution the government can recover from your seized assets. I paused, letting that sink in. Option 2. You cooperate fully with making this right. You liquidate every fraudulent asset, return every stolen dollar, and personally apologize to every family you've hurt. You shut down Whitmore Development, dissolve all the shell companies, and surrender your business licenses. You do this voluntarily, publicly, and with full acceptance of responsibility. That would ruin us, Trevor said weakly. You ruined yourselves. I'm just giving you the choice of how it happens. My father leaned back in his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. And if we choose option 2? Then I don't make the phone call today. You have 1 week to begin the restitution process. Full financial disclosure, victim notification, public confession. Pierce will oversee the entire process to ensure you don't try to hide any additional assets. What about you? Madison asked. What do you get out of this? I picked up the photograph of Michael Chen and tucked it carefully back into my jacket. I get to honor my real father's memory. I get to fulfill Grandpa Henry's promise to protect the innocent. And I get to sleep at night knowing I did the right thing. The conference room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of Denver traffic 15 floors below. How long do we have to decide? My mother asked. You've already decided. I pulled out a digital recorder and set it on the table. This entire conversation has been recorded and uploaded to secure cloud servers with instructions to release it to federal authorities if anything happens to me. Their faces went white with genuine terror. But I'm not my family. I believe in giving people the chance to do the right thing, even when they've spent decades doing the wrong thing. I gathered up my evidence folders and documentation. Option 2 starts now. Pierce will be in touch this afternoon with the exact procedures for asset liquidation and victim restitution. You have 72 hours to begin the process. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final message. And if any of you try to contact me personally, try to manipulate me, try to involve other family members, or try to interfere with this process in any way, I will immediately contact Agent Martinez and let federal prosecutors handle everything. Alexandra, wait. My father's voice was broken, defeated. I know I can't undo 20 years of mistakes, but I need you to know that I never wanted. Richard. I used his first name deliberately, the final severing of our fake family connection. You made your choices. Now live with the consequences. I left them sitting in that conference room, probably for the last time in their lives, as free people with intact reputations. Sandra was waiting by the elevators, her eyes red with tears. Miss Alex, she said quietly, I just want you to know, some of us always wondered. Some of us knew things weren't right. Why didn't anyone say anything? She shrugged helplessly. Who would we tell? They owned everything, controlled everything. But your grandfather, he was asking questions these past few months, making copies of documents, talking to people. We thought maybe he was starting to figure it out. He figured it out. I handed her one of Pierce's business cards. If you want to cooperate with the restitution process, if you have information that might help the victims, call this number. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. Miss Alex? Sandra called out just before the doors closed. Your grandfather would be proud of you. Both of them would be. Maint. 3 months later. The courtroom in downtown Denver was packed with reporters, federal agents, and more than 30 families who had been victims of the Whitmore charity fraud. I sat in the gallery watching as my former family members stood before Judge Patricia Williams to receive their sentences. They had chosen option 2, but barely. The restitution process had recovered $8.7 million in stolen funds, which was being distributed to victims according to a formula established by the federal court. Whitmore Development Group had been dissolved, its legitimate assets sold to pay debts and legal fees. Richard received 5 years in federal prison for money laundering and tax evasion, a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. Victoria got 3 years for fraud and conspiracy, Madison received 2 years, and Trevor got 18 months. But the real justice wasn't in the prison sentences. The real justice was sitting 3 rows ahead of me. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, who had used her restitution money to finally send her son to college. The Jenkins family, whose daughter was getting the wedding they'd sacrificed for charity. Tom and Sarah Mitchell, who had donated their recovered funds to a legitimate military family support organization. Pierce leaned over and whispered, "The Chen Foundation paperwork is finalized. You can start operations next month." I nodded, thinking about the foundation I was establishing with my inheritance money. The Michael Chen Foundation for Military Families would provide real college scholarships, real support services, real assistance to people who had sacrificed for their country. And the cabin? Mountain Lake is yours free and clear, perfect place for a retreat center for veterans transitioning to civilian life. After the sentencing, I walked outside into the Colorado sunshine and pulled out my phone. I had one call to make. Sergeant Major Williams? This is Lieutenant Torres. I'm ready to discuss that position with the Military Family Life Counselor Program. It was time to build something positive with my life. Something that honored both my fathers and helped people who genuinely needed support. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of Grandpa Henry's cabin, my cabin now, watching the sunrise paint the surface of Mountain Lake in shades of gold and crimson. The restoration was complete, and the first group of veteran families would arrive next week for our inaugural retreat program. Pierce walked out onto the deck, carrying 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the crisp mountain air. The media requests are still coming in, he said, handing me a mug. 60 Minutes wants to do a follow-up story. The Denver Post wants to interview you about the foundation. No interviews. I took a sip of coffee and watched an eagle soar over the lake. This isn't about me. It's about the people we're helping. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sandra Martinez, who now worked as the foundation's administrative coordinator. Rodriguez family sends their thanks. Miguel graduated summa cum laude from Colorado State. Engineering degree, just like he dreamed. I smiled and tucked the phone away. Any regrets? Pierce asked. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret destroying my family? Did I regret choosing justice over family loyalty? Did I regret the path that had led me to this isolated mountain lake instead of corporate boardrooms and society galas? None, I said finally. My real family would be proud. I pulled out the photograph of Michael Chen that I now kept in a frame on the cabin's mantel, next to Grandpa Henry's Purple Heart and Bronze Star. 2 soldiers who had served their country with honor. 2 men who had believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. 2 fathers who had shaped me into someone who could stand up to corruption and fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The sun climbed higher over the peaks, burning off the morning mist and revealing the crystal clear water where I'd learned to fish as a child, where I'd learned patience and precision, and how to read beneath the surface for signs of life. Lessons that had served me well in more ways than Grandpa Henry could have imagined. My phone rang. Probably another reporter or federal agent with follow-up questions about the case. But when I looked at the caller ID, it showed a number I didn't recognize with a Colorado Springs area code. Lieutenant Torres? This is Captain Rebecca Martinez, Fort Carson. I have a family here who could really use the kind of help your foundation provides. Young sergeant, just back from deployment, having trouble transitioning. His wife mentioned they'd heard about your program. I walked inside to get my notebook, already thinking about logistics and resources and how we could help another military family find their way through difficult circumstances. Outside, the lake reflected the blue Colorado sky like a mirror, peaceful and clear and honest in a way that human relationships rarely were. But occasionally, if you were patient and observant and willing to look beneath the surface, you could find the real thing. You could find family that wasn't bound by blood or names or legal documents, but by shared values and mutual respect, and the simple commitment to helping each other become better people. It had taken me 25 years and an inheritance I'd never expected to learn that lesson. But it was worth the wait. Times asterisk, the end. Times Mao. 2 years after the Whitmore family's downfall, the Michael Chen Foundation has provided college scholarships to 127 military families and operated veteran retreat programs that have helped over 400 families transition successfully to civilian life. The foundation operates out of facilities in Denver and the Mountain Lake Retreat Center, with a staff of 12 full-time counselors and support specialists. Former Lieutenant Alexandra Torres now serves as executive director while maintaining her position as a military family life counselor with the Department of Defense. She has testified before Congress twice on military family support issues and been recognized by the Veterans Administration for her innovative approaches to veteran transition services. Ties 6 times, the Whitmore charity fraud case led to federal legislation strengthening oversight of charitable organizations and creating additional protections for donors. The case is now taught in law schools as an example of how family wealth and social connections can be used to perpetrate long-term financial crimes. Richard, Victoria, Madison, and Trevor Whitmore all completed their prison sentences, and now live quietly in different states under court-supervised probation. None have attempted to contact Alexandra or interfere with the Foundation's work. The Mountain Lake cabin remains Alexandra's primary residence, though she travels frequently for work. She never married, but maintains close relationships with the military families she serves, and considers them her true family. Asterisk. On the anniversary of her grandfather's death each year, she climbs to the Sunrise fishing spot where she learned about patience and precision, and she reads letters from Michael Chen to Henry Whitmore, letters about hope, service, and the importance of doing right by the people who trust you with their dreams. Justice, it turns out, is not just about punishment. It's about using power responsibly to lift up people who need help, and making sure that trust is honored rather than betrayed. Some legacies are worth more than money. Some names are worth more than status. And some families are built on choice rather than blood. Alexandra Torres learned all of these lessons the hard way. But she learned them completely, and she uses them every day to honor the memory of two soldiers who never got to see the woman she became. Notch, they would both be proud.